Alright y'all, this video is for college algebra support for 7.4. So this is going to be a lot of equation solving. So number one, they want me to solve. So they're giving me two parentheses. I got a 7w plus 3 and then a 4w minus 5. All these are equal to 0. So the nice thing about this, since these are already in factors, and that's already a 0, we can actually continue from what they've given us, okay? Now, had that not been a 0, I would have had to FOIL this, then move that number to this side to get a 0 over there. So since this is already a 0, all we're going to do is set each of our factors equal to 0 and solve them. Okay, so first one you would subtract 3 first. So 7w equals a negative 3. Then divide by 7. So my first answer or solution is a negative 3 over 7, since that won't reduce. Then you do the same thing here. Solve this one, so you want to start out by adding 5. Then we get 4w equals 5. And then divide by 4. So those cancel, and you get w equals a positive 5 over 4. So you'll put them in MathLab and be done, okay? And let's see, I think I can get number 2 here, that way I can get more. This one, they're not factored already, so this one has a v squared minus 5v minus 24 equal to 0. So what I like about this homework, if you're a little bit weak at factoring, this homework will fix you. So since I know that's going to factor, I'm going to set up two parentheses, still equal to 0. There's a v squared in the front, so I would put a v and a v in the front of both of these parentheses, because v times v is v squared. Now here's the trick on this one. Since the last number is negative, these will have unlike signs. If that last number was positive, then both of these signs would have been the same as the middle, okay? So what this is telling me, unlike signs, and then this will tell me the larger signs or the larger number will be negative and the smaller number will be positive. So the trick on this is find factors of 24. So 24 could be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and then 4 and 6. One of those pairs of numbers will subtract and get me a 5, and that's going to be the 3 and the 8. Now remember, since the 8's the bigger number, it's got to be negative like the middle, so you get a negative 8, positive 3. Now a positive 3 and a negative 8 still equal negative 5, so we're good to go. And then that 3 times negative 8 equal negative 24. Okay? So now, since we've got it factored into parentheses, we're going to do just like we did over here. Set both of these equal to 0. And then solve them both. So I can solve the first one by subtracting 3. So I get v is a negative 3. Second one I would solve by adding 8. And I get v is a positive 8. If you notice, the solutions always have opposite signs than the factors do. That was a plus 3, the solution's a negative 3. Negative 8, solution's a positive 8. So you'll see all these little tricks as you start going through these, okay? Alright, the next one has 2n squared plus 9n minus 26 equals 0. So I'm going to factor this doing what I call the no fuss method. If y'all do the AC method or the factor by grouping method, you can do that still. So first thing you want to do is multiply that 2 times 26. So 2 times 26 equals 52. And I know it's negative, but I don't care about that negative. I just want that number, okay? So 52 is the number we got to find factors of. So we would still set up our parentheses because we got a 0 over here, and that's the main thing we needed. So watch what I do. There's still an n squared, so that's going to be an n and an n. We'll take care of that 2 in a little bit. Now, the last sign's negative, so one of these is positive, one of these is negative. So here's the difference. Instead of using the last number like we did up here, we're going to use this product we came with. The first number times the last number is 52. We want factors of 52 that we'll subtract and get a 9. So let's see what we got. We got 1 and 52, 2 and 26. Oh, let's see, 3 don't work. 4 and 13. And y'all, I think that's it. So the one factor that has a 9 as a difference is 13 and 4. 13 is larger number, so it's positive like the middle number, and the 4 is negative. So at this moment, 13 minus 4 give you 9. But y'all, n times n don't give me an n squared. So what happens? Anytime you borrow the first number and multiply by the last number to get the product, you got to take both of these numbers we came and divide by the 2. At this point, you're going to simplify them. If you can't simplify, then you got to move the 2 in the front. So watch what I mean. Since 13 will not divide by 2, I take the 2 and move it in front so that this gives me a 2n plus 13. Second parentheses, you can divide 4 by 2, so you get n minus 4 divided by 2 is 2 equal to my 0. So if you cannot divide that fraction out, you got to move the bottom number in front of its variable. Now watch this. That 2n times n is 2n squared. 13 times negative 2 is negative 26. And then if you take the 13n in the middle and the negative 4n on the outsides, those add up to get 9n. So the trick on that really is multiply by the first number to get your product, and then once you got your two numbers, divide them both by that first number again, okay? So you borrow the number, then you divide it back out. Now, we got it factored, so we would take both of these and set them equal to 0. Okay, so let's see. My first one, I would subtract 13 from both sides. So I get 2n equals a negative 13. And then divide by 2 so that n equals a negative 13 over 2. So let me pull that down a little bit so y'all can see. So there's my negative 13 over 2, and then this one, you got n minus 2 equals 0. We would add 2 to both sides and get n equals a positive 2. So y'all, that's the trick. When you got a number in front, you got to borrow it and then divide it back out, okay? All right, let's see what they got next. So number 4. All right, so my number 4 here has 5x squared minus 35 equals 0. Okay, so one thing I noticed is that these all have 5s in them. So if you wanted to make this a little smaller, you could divide that 5 out of everybody. Now, since this has got an x squared, there's not an x term in the middle. Okay, I got this x squared term, but there's no x in the middle. So the easiest way to solve this is square roots. So to solve for square roots, you try to get the x squared on one side by itself, everything else on the other side. But remember, you can only do the square root method if there's no x term in the middle. So watch what I do. Let's get the x squared by itself by adding 35 to both sides. So y'all, I get 5x squared equals 35. Now I'm going to divide them both by the 5 because I want that x squared totally by itself. So those cancel, you get your x squared equals 35 divided by 5 is 7. So now to solve this kind of problem, I take square roots of both sides. So square roots undo exponents. So that means I take the square root of the right side, and anytime you take the square root of a number in front of it, you need to put a plus or minus because 2 positives will make that. 2 negatives multiply to get that. Alright, the square root of x squared is x. So, there's no square root of 7. We don't want decimal answers. So since we can't take the square root of 7, our final answer is x equals plus or minus square root of 7. So that means technically the answer is a square root of 7 and a negative square root of 7. And that's all that plus or minus means on these, okay? Alright, 5 is the same thing. 2x squared equals 10. So remember, I want to get this x squared by itself with a 1 in front of it. So the first thing I would do is divide them both by the 2. So look here, those 2's cancel. You get an x squared. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So we're at the same point we did over here. X squared is by itself. So take a square root of both sides. And remember, since I'm taking the square root of a number, I'm going to put the plus or 5 in front of it. So, square root of x squared is x. Y'all, we cannot find a number times itself that equals 5, so that's going to stay a plus or minus square root of 5. So one answer is the square root of 5. Second answer is the negative square root of 5. Alright, I'm going to fit 6 right here. 3x squared plus 6 equals 0. Alright, so let's see. We want to get the x squared by itself, so we subtract 6. So 3x squared equals a negative 6. Then let's divide by 3. So y'all, I get x squared equals a negative 2. Alright, so remember now, your next go is to take square roots. So square root of x squared equals a plus or minus square root of a negative 2. So here's the thing on this. I'm going to play with that square root of negative 2. We cannot keep that negative under that radical. But let's see about the 2. The 2, we can't simplify anymore because 2 does not have a square root other than decimals. So what we do, we've got to break out that negative as a negative 1. So this is a square root of negative 1 times a 2. Now, although we can't take the square root of negative 1, if you punch it on the calculator, see it's giving me an error because I'm trying to take the square root of a negative 1. Now, if I wanted it to do that problem, I would change my mode. Down here where it says real, if you put it on a plus bi and then try to take that square root, it gives you I. So remember, the square root of negative 1 is I, so this becomes a I times the square root of 2. So here we go. Square root of x squared is an x. That's going to equal a plus or minus I square root of 2. So if you got a negative under a square root, you got to pull it out as a I. Okay? Alright, let's see. I can put 7 right here. 7 has an x squared plus 81 equals 0. Now check this out. Any number you square is going to be positive, and adding a positive number to that is not ever going to get us a 0. So we can't do this in the real world, so I'm expecting some more of these imaginary answers. So what we would do, subtract that 81. X squared equals a negative 81. And then do the square roots. So I'm going to do a plus or minus square root of that negative 81. So the square root of x squared is x. That's going to equal a plus or minus. So remember that square root of negative 81 is really a square root of negative 1 times a square root of 81. Square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of 81 is 9. So you could put 9i, but they usually put the number first and then the I. Over here I had a radical. That's why I put the I first. So if you got radicals, you usually put them first so it don't look like it's underneath. But if you just got a number in the I, that's all we do, so that this is a plus or minus 9i. So one answer is a positive 9i. Second answer would be a negative 9i. Now if you did that on the calculator, this is only going to give you the 9i part that's positive. So second square root of a negative 81. It's going to give me 9i because the calculator only gives you the positive values. Just remember, there is a negative value also, because a negative times a negative is still a positive. Alright, so let me move the camera back up. It's like I got to switch it every time. Alright, same thing. 2a squared equals 14a. So this one's different. It does have the a term. Remember, all those that I just did had numbers over here, not no letters. So since you got the a term, you need all this on one side equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 14a from both sides. Now be careful, those are not like terms. So that's going to be a 2a squared minus 14a, now equal to my 0. Alrighty, so the way I would solve this one is factoring out a greatest common factor, because 2 and 14 both have a 2 in them. A squared and a both have an a in them. So if you factored out a 2a from both of these, 2a squared divided by 2a leaves you an a, minus 14a divided by 2a leaves you a 7, and all that's equal to 0. So what I did on this, and I factored out the GCF, which was a 2a. And then you'll notice, if you FOIL it back, 2a times a is 2a squared. 2a times negative 7 is a negative 14a. Alright, so what you would do now is set both of these equal to 0, because we got the factoring part done. Anytime you factor out a variable as a GCF, no matter what number's in front of it, when you divide 0 by any number, you're still going to get a 0. So if the variable is the GCF, that answer will always be 0. Then on my second one, I'm going to add 7 to both sides, and I get x is a positive 7. Alright, let me see what I would do to 9. Ooh, 9's got a 3y to the third minus a 14y squared minus 5y, all equal to 0. So the first thing I would do, they all have a y in them. Now they all don't have a number that's common, but they all have a y. So you're going to put the y out front and then put everything else in parentheses. So you had 3y to the cube, take out a y, that's going to leave you a 3y squared. Minus 14y squared, take out a y, leaves a y. Minus 5y divided by the y leaves a 5. All that equal to 0. So I know this one, since it's a GCF like I had over here, that answer is going to give me 0 eventually. But what I got to do is figure out what's happening in here. So the y comes down, and I'm going to factor this by, like I did a while ago, 3 times 5 is 15. So let's start our parentheses. We know we got a y here and a y here. So since I had a y cubed altogether, I got 3 y's. That's negative, so these are going to be unlike signs. I need factors of 15 that will subtract and give me 14, and that'll be 15 and 1. 15 is a larger number, so it's going to be negative like the middle, and the 1 will be positive. Now remember, since I multiplied this 3 to get this 15, I now got to divide both of them by my 3. So bring this y down, and then let's get this parenthesis. So 1 does not divide by 3, so that 3 goes in front of the y, so I get a 3y plus 1. This one, 15, will divide by 3, so you get y minus 5, all equal to 0. These are cool, because when I'm done, I want y'all to see something here. So now, set all 3 of these equal to 0. Alright, that is done. The first number is 0. Then I do 3y plus 1 equals 0, and y minus 5 equals 0. So notice the first number or answer is 0. So now I get the next one by subtracting 1 and then dividing by the 3. So that y is going to equal a negative 1/3. And then this one here, I'm going to add 5. And I get y is a positive 5. So my three answers are 0, negative 1/3, and a 5. Since the exponent's at 3, you get 3 answers. Exponent is 2, you get 2 answers. Now here's what I like about this method I showed you. You see that positive 1/3 was one of my factors at that point? My answer was a negative 1/3. And then this here was a negative 5. My answer was a positive 5. That's going to happen pretty much all the time on these. Okay? Alright, let's see. Number 10. This is a factor by grouping problem because it's got 4 terms. So I got a 8x to the third plus an x squared minus 32x minus 4 all equals 0. And they say the hint, factor by grouping. What that means is you group these two together and these two together. Out of each group, you want to factor out their greatest common factor. So here, you don't have numbers in common, but an x3 and an x2 both have an x squared in them. So 8x3 divided by x squared leaves a 8x. I'm just subtracting exponents. Plus x squared divided by x squared leaves a 1. Now, the next GCF has the same sign as this third term. So since this third term is negative, this is going to be negative. And then let's see, what does 32 and 4 both have in common? They both have a 4. So watch this. Negative 32x, if you divide by negative 4, leaves a 8x. And then negative 4 divided by negative 4 leaves a positive 1. All this equal to 0 still. Do you notice now how these parentheses are matched up? So what happens, since the parentheses match up, we bring that out as one of our factors. The other factors is everything else, which is the x squared minus 4. All this is still equal to 0. So here, parentheses match up. They make one factor. Everything on the outside makes the second factor. Now, take both of these, set them equal to 0. So I got 8x plus 1 is going to equal 0. X squared minus 4 is going to equal 0. So this will give me one answer. That one's going to give me the other two, okay? So this one will subtract 1. 8x equals negative 1. And then we'll divide by 8. So x equals a negative 1/8. And then here, remember that's an x squared in a number. So this one, I want the x squared by itself. Because remember, this one had the letters while we did it different. This one has no letter, it's just a number. So this is x squared equals 4. And then I take my square roots of both sides. And remember, since I'm doing a number, that's going to be plus or minus. So here we go. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of a 4 is a plus or minus 2. So my three answers are going to be a negative 1/8, a positive 2, and a negative 2. That's how we get the two answers with that plus or minus, okay? Alrighty, so let me see. So I think the next two we're going to look at graphs on this. So let me see if y'all can see this picture. So y'all got my pictures right here. So it says, what are the x-intercepts? So the x-intercepts are these points where it's crossing the x-axis. So let's see, if that's 10, 9, that's going to be 8. So that's crossing at 8. So the first x-intercept will be 8, 0. You got to write them as an ordered pair because they're points. This one over here, let's see, negative 10, negative 9, negative 8. That looks like negative 7. So that point would be negative 7, 0. Those are my x-intercepts. Now check this out. The zeros are the x values where my graph crosses the x-axis. So the first 0 would be 8. So I got a 0 over 8. The second 0 was negative 7. So these problems just wanted you to realize that zeros are the same thing as the x-intercepts x value, okay? So watch this, same thing. Here's my 2 points I'm looking at. The intercepts are, this one looks like what, a negative 1. So that'll be negative 1, 0. And make sure you put a comma in between these points, okay? This one looks like 1, 2, 3. So that'll be 3, 0. Now the zeros of the function is just what x value is where it crosses over it. So that one's crossing at a negative 1. This one's crossing at a positive 3. Alright y'all, so here's the gist of this problems. The quadratic formula. So, I think first of all we'll write the quadratic formula. How about that? Alright, so our quadratic formula, well, I'm off on that. Quadratic formula. Now some of y'all have used this already, but the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Also remember, to use this formula, you want your quadratic equations in this form all equal to 0. So get them in descending order, x squared, x number, all equal to 0. Then you pick your numbers to put into the formula. So what are we on? 13 it looks like? So these are mainly just a bunch of them doing the quad formula. So this one has an x squared minus 8x equals 65. So this is not a 0 like I need, so I need to subtract this 65 and move it to the other side. So that I get an x squared minus my 8x minus 65 all equal to 0. Alright, so let's see. A, since there's no number here, is a 1. B would be a negative 8. C would be a negative 65. And I'm going to show you all the power of that program I sent y'all in that email. Alright, so let's plug this into the formula. X equals negative. That negative is always in the formula first. Then you put in your B, which is a negative 8. Plus or minus, then you got that square root. B squared would be negative 8 squared. I would put that negative 8 in parentheses if you square it on the calculator. Watch this. Negative 8 squared is a positive 64, but if you do it like this, without parentheses, it's going to give you negative 64, which is wrong, okay? Alright, minus 4 times A, which was 1, and C, which is a negative 65. All that's over 2 times my A, which is 1. So all you're doing is you're putting the B's right here, the A's right here like it says, and the C right here. This is all order of operations. A negative times a negative 8 is a positive 8, plus or minus. Negative 8 squared, that's 8 times 8 is 64. Now here's a trick on the quad formula. All three of these numbers on the right side are being multiplied. So we got a negative times a negative is going to make that a positive. And then 4 times 65 times the 1, if you want to, is 260. All over 2 times 1 is 2. Alright, so here we go. 8 plus or minus. The next thing we would do would add 64 plus the 260, which is what, 324. All that's over 2. Alright, so next thing to do is try to take the square root of 324. So second x squared brings up the radical. Put in a 324, hit enter, you get 18 all over 2. So y'all, let me tell you, at this point, you could simplify this a little bit more before you try to get your two numbers. Oh, stuff is sticking. So let me get this back up here where I got some room. Alright, so since all three of these numbers divide by 2, I'm going to divide them all by 2, so I get 8 divided by 2 is 4, plus or minus 18 divided by 2 is 9. So I will use these two numbers to get my answers. So my first answer is going to be 4 plus 9. Well, 4 plus 9 is 13. Second answer, you use the subtraction, so you do 4 minus 9. 4 minus 9 is negative 5. So you use the plus or minus to get the two answers. One time you go through and add, second time you go through there and subtract. So watch this. If you downloaded that quad program I sent y'all, you hit program, go all the way down till you find my quad program, hit enter, and then enter again gets it started. And this thing wants the A. Well, we said the A was a 1, so you do 1, enter. B was a negative 8, so you use this negative down here on the bottom. So you use this negative down here, negative 8, enter. And then the last number I had was what? Negative, oh no, it wasn't, yeah, it was negative 65, because you got to do it, you got to have it equal to 0 before you use your numbers. So that's a negative 65. If I hit enter, I get 13 and negative 5. Okay? So I'm going to do some more of these quads for you, because they are tricky. Well, not too tricky if you get the hang of the idea, okay? So this would be 14, I think. Every time I move that, I move too far, don't I? And let me move this down where I can see that. Alright, y'all, this one has 6x squared plus 17x equals 45. So just like I did a while ago, that 45 needs to be a 0, so you're going to subtract 45 from both sides. This will give me a 6x squared plus 17x minus 45, all equal to 0. So A is 6, B is 17, C is a negative 45. Alright, so let's see what I'm going to do to that. I'm going to use my x equals negative b, which is a 17. So see, that negative changes that sign from positive to negative or negative to positive. Alright, then I have 17 squared. I don't need parentheses because that's not a negative 17. Minus 4 times a, which is 6, and c, which is a negative 45. All that's over 2 times a, which is 6. So I'm always going back to the quad formula to plug my numbers in once I got them, okay? Alright, so that's negative 17 plus or minus. 17 squared is equal to 289. Notice this side has two negatives, so that's going to be a positive again. So let's see, 4 times 6 is 24. 24 times 45 is going to give me, 1,080. All that's over 2 times 6, which is 12. Alright, so here we go, negative 17 plus or minus. Next thing we want to do is add that stuff under that radical. So 1,080 plus 289 is going to give me 1,369. All that's over 12. So the next thing, let's see if we can take the square root. So second x squared to get my radical of a 1369. Oh, look at that. It equals 37. So this becomes a negative 17 plus or minus 37 over 12. Now, 37, 17, and 12 don't all have the same numbers. So we got to get our two answers by using the whole thing. So the first answer is negative 17 plus 37, all divided by 12. So negative 17 and 37 gives me a 20 over 12, which we can reduce. What are we taking out of those? 4s. So I get a 5 over 3. Second answer. I take the negative 17 minus 37 over 12. So let's see, that's a negative 44. So negative 54 over 12. So if you don't like simplifying fractions, just do negative 54 divided by 12, hit enter, and then do math, enter twice, and that turns into a negative 9 halves. So they took the 6's out of that, okay? Now let's see if this calculator will give us fraction answers on the quad. So I'm going to go down to my quad, hit enter twice. So remember, A was 6, B was 17, C was a negative 45. When I hit enter, I'm getting decimals, but remember, hit enter one more time, and there you go, a 5/3 and a negative 9 halves. So the calculator does not mind giving you them quad answers, okay? Alright, y'all, so I'm pretty much out of time on this one, so I wanted to do one more that said put your answers in A plus BI form, which is imaginary numbers. So this one is like number 17. 2x squared plus 6x equals a negative 5. So where the negative 5 is needs to be a 0. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So I get 2x squared plus 6x plus 5 all equal to 0. Alrighty, so here we go. A is 2, B is 6, and C is 5. X equals negative B, which is a 6, plus or minus square root B squared, which is 6 squared, minus 4 times A, which is 2, C, which is 5, all over 2 times A, which is 2. So the A's are 2's, the C is a 5, and the B's are 6's. Alright, so bring down that negative 6, plus or minus. Let's see, what does 6 squared is 36. This time when you multiply all this, there's only one negative, so it's going to stay negative. So 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. All that's over 2 times 2, which is 4. Alright, so let's do the work under the radical. 36 minus 40 is going to give you a negative 4. All that's over 4. Negative 6 plus or minus. Alright. Oh, hold on. I said 36 minus 40. That's a negative 4. My bad. That's a negative 4, okay? So watch this. The square root of a negative 4, you would break out that negative 1 and a 4. Remember, square root of negative 1 is I. You cannot take the square root of a negative 1. But the square root of 4 is 2. So basically, this becomes a 2y if you write the I after the number. So square root of negative 4 is 2y. But y'all, all this is over 4. So what they mean when they say, well, let me simplify this, because all three of these numbers will divide by 2. So you get a negative 3 plus or minus I over 2. So when they say they want to answer in A plus BI form, they want me to make this into two fractions. So the first fraction would be the negative 3 divided by 2. Then you would put your plus or minus. And then this is just basically 1/2 I, or you could put I over 2. Either way, it don't matter, okay? But notice, and just make that like a 1 in front of the I. But really, you're splitting it into two fractions, and each part has to be over that 2, okay? So watch this calculator. A here was what, 2? B was 6. C was 5. Negative 3 plus I over 2. Negative 3 minus I over 2. So it's going to give it to you in this form. Just remember, when the computer wants you to split it into A plus BI, you got to do this to it, okay? If they don't specify that, then you can leave it like this. But what this is, A represents the real number, which is what the negative 3/2 is. And then this 1/2 I is the imaginary number, which is what that BI means, okay? So, y'all, that looks like it on this one. So, we're going to stop this, and good luck.